Welcome to NeuroNoodle's Neurofeedback and Neuropsychology podcast featuring tech legend Jay Gunkelman. He's the man who has read well over 500,000 brain scans, and Dr. Marie Swingle, author of iMinds. Our goal is to provide information and promote options for better mental health. The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.
Morning.
Jay Gunkelman, greetings from Lake of the Ozarks.
It is a gorgeous area.
Oh, it's amazing. It's amazing what the Great Depression, putting people to work, flooding this area, and creating all this out here. It's amazing. Now it's so very desirable area, just like you said, Jay. And a lot of flags around here, a lot of Trump flags. As you saw last night. I should do a show from San Francisco and do a contrast of it. But
well, that's not a great topic.
You don't think?
If we're going to be in the neuroscience world, when I was young, my father was a businessman.
Yeah,
and a quite successful one.
Right.
He had two rules: you don't talk religion and you don't talk politics. Weather, sports, how your kids are doing in school. I mean, all those kind of things are fair game, but religion and politics were, and personal finance also. That was so personal. It was nobody. I was actually in high school before I realized that my family was really actually quite wealthy, because there was not shown. There was no nouveau riche chains and fancy cars or something. But my father said the fanciest car he would ever get would be a Buick, because he didn't want to be ostentatious. No Cadillacs. Right. Well, later he got my mother a Cadillac.
Of course.
It was gorgeous. It was dark green, almost black, and it would have the smaller, long fins. And anyway, she also had a Mustang at one point,
right?
With a Hurst shifter. Crazy. Well,
it's amazing when you go to Florida, you go to Missouri, you go to Texas. Everybody has their sides, but there's also a peace that everybody feels because you're amongst whatever your beliefs are, and because everybody's talking politics here and everybody's talking religion here. It's it just is what it is, and you just can't let it be your identity, or some people take it as an identity, and I think that's where we run into problems, because now it's we're getting closer to November, and we talked about this earlier in the year that politics would be coming up because anxieties are going to be popping up. We're going to have the DNC convention in Chicago, and back in '68, we don't have Richard J. Daley around anymore.
I remember '68. So I ran the head shop in Fargo in 1969.
I just think three years later, Neurofeedback.
Yeah.
How did that start for you? You did college and you had a job, and you're like, you know what? Let me get in.
I had 3 years of pre-med. I was accepted in med school. There was a transfer from University of North Dakota and Grand Forks, with their pre-med program, was a feeder to the University of Minnesota med school. And I was accepted there. My father wanted me to be a surgeon. I actually assisted in some surgeries, and I was unimpressed. It seemed to me like you're, this fancy stitchery, but that's like a seamstress, and there's swapping parts like an auto mechanic, and you're working with a slab of meat, so it's kind of like a butcher. But those are trades; they're not a profession where you're using your noggin to be creative or something. And I thought I would be bored to freaking death learning to do a couple surgical procedures and getting stuck doing them over and over and over again. And I assisted in a hysterectomy, which wasn't exactly the one that would give you you're going to be looking up somebody's bunghole,
Yeah, yeah,
fixing
yeah, yeah,
things.
yeah.
I could do without this. I assisted in a cesarean section for twins, and that was joyous and all of that. But um, I wouldn't want to be delivering kids either. You
Oh, this
know,
is kids. This isn't like animals or horses or anything.
no, no,
Cows. Okay, all right.
no. My father was on the hospital board. They wanted his money, so
Yeah,
they put him on the
got it, got
board.
it, got
So
it.
anyway, I went to Europe and goofed around in 1969. Came back. Uh, um, Worked very briefly in construction, undergrounding for AT&T's overhead lines when they had to go across a swamp or across a river or across the face of an earth-filled
Hmm.
dam. Where their crews didn't want to do the work, you could contract that work at a really high rate. I mean, they paid by the foot in a huge way. So
Yeah, yeah.
anyway, that's what we did, and I cut those four fingers off. I got them caught up in a piece of equipment, and so I went back to school. But before I went back to school, I was already in the draft, and I got a
Uh-huh.
1Y. I can't salute properly, so
Oh
it's
my goodness.
and I cut those four fingers off and they are still not right. So
Yeah.
it's not like bone spurs that disappeared or something. But I don't know too many people that got a 1Y. They were very unusual. A 4F was a physical deferment where you're too screwed up to end up going
Yeah,
to
yeah.
war in any way. 1Y, if there was a declared war, they could have taken you. Now, it was a police action in Vietnam. It wasn't a declared war. So,
Right,
it
right.
was an odd twist to that.
Or the Tonkin resolution or whatever.
Yeah,
LBJ, but
Tonkin Gulf. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So Jay, how did you get into the neurofeed like 72? Like what did you
Okay,
start building
eh,
them
with
first?
with with three with 3 years of pre-med, my background was, you know, anatomy, physiology, and chemistry, and all of that was already jammed in for 3 years. And I switched universities I ran out of courses I wanted to take at University of North Dakota, and I took a lot of weird courses. Uh, um, how to make baskets, throwing clay, and making. I mean, whatever class I wanted, I took. Because
Right.
I didn't go through registration. I just went to the computer system and got myself registered in what I wanted to get registered in. And then I went to NDSU in Fargo, the town I was raised in. Yeah, exactly. Go Bison. Um, horns up. So, and there was Bill Beatty and Pat Beatty, and they were both professors there. And Bill Beatty did physiological psychology, which talking psychology to me with a background in pre-med seemed like wah 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 wah
Yeah,
Charlie
right,
Brown talk.
right, right.
Give me a break. So but this physiological psychology stuff sounded really interesting, and we did some simple little rat studies where we implanted cannulas and gave them dexamethasone and looked at their behaviors, counted the number of poops in the cage, all that kind of crap, and all, all of the lab gear for the surgeries end up having all the little clamps disappear. They became roach clips everywhere in the university. People had these little things. Anyway, um, but physiological psychology is biofeedback, and I did a brief study using, actually, it was using a grass tube type Model 6. And it's an ancient old EEG machine. We were using one channel just to do EKG and count the interbeat intervals. And we had a one-way mirror, and they had an interview with a young woman. They would volunteer, students would volunteer for the study, and we simply rated them as whether they were more like hippie chicks or sorority girls.
Yeah.
And the heart rate variability between the two groups was dramatically different. So anyway, it was
What was the difference between sorority girls and hippie chicks?
um, a lot of variability. And the sorority girls and the hippie chicks were pretty stable. Uh, so
Okay. That's all
anyway,
I need to know.
anyway, but I went to the state hospital and proposed a neuroanatomy, neurophysiology based laboratory to treat patients, and they accepted that. And my my student co-buddy that we used to study together for the neuroanatomy course, and that started with like 40 people in the class, and it broke down to only four after the first day. The instructor said, in the first 2 weeks, we're going to end up doing a dissection of a sheep brain. And by the time we're done, I'm going to tell you two spots on the outside of the brain. You have to make an imaginary line going through and tell me what structures you're going to encounter and what their general function is. Well, nobody came back. Everybody was scared off on that. But I thought, oh boy. And so did Larry. And he had actually switched majors from engineering to psychophysiology. And he was the one who built the amps for the lab that we ended up with, and ended up still he made the amps for most of the neurofeedback world. And he's retired, moved over to the Philippines with his wife, and her family's over there. They've got a
Got it.
gigantic compound, really a fabulous place. Yeah, one of those never-ending pools. Looks out
Yeah,
over the
yeah,
ocean. Yeah, yeah, he did well. So,
yeah.
but we were we basically were kids, 21 years old. Uh, our own laboratory. We make our own equipment. We get to go pick whatever patient we want at the state hospital to try and work with them. And you know, there's no
Well,
IRB. There was
DSM.
no, well, and the diagnosis back in '72 was not really all that intact. They just started
Yeah,
to diagnose ADD as basically just a hyperactivity disability of something in '68,
yeah.
but they didn't really have the ADD ADHD thing figured out yet even. And although
What what?
there was an adolescent division, most of the time those weren't the clients that I ended up with. I had alcoholics, and I had,
Addiction.
yeah, and also anxiety. Um,
Okay.
my first case was an anxiety case, and her father had it. I mean, it was a familial
Yeah, yeah,
issue, and her father died in the dining hall at the state hospital. He choked and died there. So she couldn't go to the dining hall without having a panic attack because that's where her father had died. So
yeah.
they had a cart wheeled up to her room. She got room service at the state hospital. And imagine the cost of putting somebody up it's not inexpensive. A state hospital visit costs the state a significant
Yeah.
amount for the overhead for the building. They had their own farm to produce the meat and the wheat. I mean, it was a big operation. And anyway, she was one of the more costly patients because they were they had to assign somebody to wheel food up to her and back, and you can't have just any forks and knives there, and some people in the state hospital aren't supposed to have forks and knives,
That's
so
right. Right.
anyway, so we had her, and uh, we hooked up. She had a lot of muscle tension, and so we started to try to get her to relax her forearm. The most voluntary muscle in the hand is the ones that wiggle your fingers, the forearm extensors.
Hmm.
So we hooked those up, and we asked her to, move the needle down, and the needle moved down, but she got more and more anxious as she got more and more relaxed. And uh, if you let your guard down and you know that they're about to hit you on the head with something, you're going to be anxious. So she got relaxed, and that's not an uncommon finding, but we sure the hell didn't expect it because what did we know, so we sent her back to her room, and so we went up to her room with our equipment on a cart and hooked her up, and we did alpha training for 14 sessions for her, and it worked miracles. And we were telling people how good she was getting, and people go, you meet everybody at lunch, so in the big dining hall, that they had a big divider, the staff on one side, patients on the other. And so, you sit down. Oh, how's it going? What's your lab doing? Oh, we're
Right.
working
Right.
with Dorothy. We're working with Dorothy. Oh, and how's that going? Well, she's getting much, much better. I think pretty soon she's going to be ready for discharge. Well, we sent her out a whole bunch of different times. She looks like she's doing pretty good. She'll be out for a couple of days, and she'll have a panic attack, and they'll send her right back. And so they weren't even really up to try to find a place for her. And finally, there was a day where she walked into the dining room to have her lunch, and it brought the entire staff side of the dining room to a silent halt. Like one of those commercials where everybody's trying to hear what somebody has said, some
Right. Right.
financial
Right.
advice thing, so, well, the whole thing went silent, and people, oh my freaking God, Dorothy's in the dining area, as I told you, she was getting better, So at that point, they started to look for a place for her in a halfway house that had a library that was a few blocks away, and she liked to read, and she was, she would basically hang out in her room and read and chill out and do little walks, and so
Yeah.
she ended up in a halfway house, which is much cheaper than full care at the state hospital. So they consider that a gigantic financial success. And we had a handful of patients in the first 6 months that were turned around like that, to the point where they fully funded us. And that that was it was a dramatic case, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it was not an unusual case. The rest of the ones with the alcoholics, we trained alpha training in alcoholics. Well, it worked with Dorothy, and alpha training, they don't have any alpha in their brain. They got low voltage fast EEGs. Let's just train alpha. We were kids. We didn't know what to do, and there was only SMR and alpha. That's all you had,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and the alpha training at the back of the head at PZ for the alcoholics worked so well. We started the lab in 72. In 74, we wrote a grant to NIH it worked so well, we thought it should be studied with a formal structured study, and they didn't fund it, of course, but
Yeah.
you know, it was it worked so well. We kept doing it for another year before we left and moved to California. Once we moved to California, we started to manufacture equipment for biofeedback. We had a two-channel muscle machine for EMG flexor extensor pairs for muscle rehab, not just for relaxation, but for muscle rehab. You have to have flexor extensor pairs both monitored for
Do you
that.
have a picture of that, Jay? Do you have a
I,
picture
I,
that you could send?
I do. I'll have to
Yeah,
dig it out.
yeah, later. I like to put it up. I'm
Yeah,
sure
yeah.
people would be curious. Continue. Go ahead.
And and then we also had a temperature feedback device, and that temperature feedback device was sensitive to 1/10,000th of a degree change per second. We fed back the derivative and also the absolute power, the absolute temperature on a digital display. And so it was very, very, very sensitive. And temperature is really a slow changing signal. So feeding back the absolute signal itself is kind of a boring, slow changing signal. It's like watching something stuck in molasses slowly falling over, Oh my God, this is gonna take forever. But with the derivative, you see the rate of change, and you. Anyway, it was a very good temperature device, and all of those had FDA 510(k) medical clearances on them. And then we made the EEG device, and that cost so much we basically just closed closed down. Well, uh, I decided I had to get a job, and I went
Yeah.
into the EEG lab, and but Larry kept the manufacturing company. That sputtered along for a little bit, and then the EEG company that hired me in the lab as a tech hired him to help the guy doing repairs, and within a month or so, he
Right.
was the head of the department.
Got it.
uh, it was quite obvious he was the one who knew what was going on. And anyway, he's as I said, he retired
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
and is doing well.
Jay, you brought up at the beginning, happiness, and you had a good upbringing, whatever that means. It's all relative. Okay, you're financially stable. It's all relative, right?
It's aces, aces of a
Yeah.
zero. Who the
Yeah.
freak gets that? I mean, uh, so yeah,
But
I a bizarre circumstance of the 1950s idyllic white
yeah,
privilege, what
yeah,
all the things.
all the buzzwords. You're going to bring up white privilege while I'm in the Ozarks,
Oh well,
right?
I'm white and I was very privileged,
My
and in
I'm trying
fact,
to dig myself out of a hole.
my schooling was paid for by my parents fully. And if I wanted to go to Europe for
Right.
to goof around, I was over there and I watched us land on the moon,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
in a bar in Germany. I had a blast running around. I had all that covered. It was a great circumstance, and I know students who were scraping by who ate. They had a cafeteria ticket, but it wasn't really enough, and
Right. Right. Right.
yeah. Anyway, I have a soft spot in my heart and probably some in my head for students at this point,
Yeah.
and yeah, I shave my beard off and donate the proceeds from the
Yeah.
auction of the beard to students, and there's a lot of other donations that I end up doing, and free talks and things like that I do in order to help students. So
No,
um,
you take care of the students, Jay. You are amazing, and neurofeedback wouldn't be where it is without you. That's why we
well,
spend an hour a week.
and
Because, but where I'm
yeah, but
going with it,
I'm I'm
what it,
I'm kind of backfilling for the privilege I had by doing what I can to try to help out in some small ways. I mean, uh,
you're,
I'm a slide bias. The least I can do.
but Jay, getting back to happiness, there are some people that are privileged, have everything that they want, and they're not happy. Like, what is going on mentally that's going on with that?
You know, Mood regulation is a frontal lobe phenomenon, but it also requires subcortical function to be working well, your amygdala. Now, if you've had early life trauma and you've been really traumatized, and you've got dissociation and complex PTSD and things like that, it's going to be hard for you to feel fine no matter what you have because you're not right. You've got to get your brain working well for you to end up. If you get your brain working fine, you're going to be feeling great. You
Yeah.
know, and I think Linda Thompson's doing a talk about that basically coming up. If you get your brain right, your body feels great. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and so frontal balance, the amygdala, the insula, get these areas tuned up, and you don't need, well, in fact, it probably gets in your way to end up having bazillion dollars.
That's
You
what
know,
I'm saying. Is it a comparison thing? Is it like did Instagram kind of accelerate the comparison of, hey, or selfishness, like in a family, if somebody passes away and the money's given out and some I didn't get my share, all that. Where does all that come from? Same thing?
uh, silly competitiveness and uh,
Yeah.
uh, you know, I think uh, emotionally, a lot of people are stuck in junior high. Uh, clicks and
Yeah. Right.
little simple things and competitive mindsets, and that you can study more expansive uses of your consciousness and probably get past a lot of those kinds of concerns. But a lot of people are stuck there, and that unless there's a real reason for them to expand beyond that, they don't. Now, it could be a health crisis or a health crisis for a loved one or some hit in the head in a religious experience. Who knows,
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
uh,
That's kind
uh,
of where I'm going with it. These people with all the money, they don't know what it's going to take to make them happy. What is going on? It,
in fact, the money gets in the way.
yeah.
Let's say today, somebody you won the freaking lottery, Pete. You've got a bazillion dollars, and
EEGs for everyone.
you're now sitting on a pile of like Scrooge McDuck. You're in uh, uh, Fat City. This is a great circumstance. But now, who do you trust? Okay, maybe
Everybody's got their hand out.
a few of your old buddies, but pretty soon maybe one of your old buddies is looking at the gold pie you're sitting on and say, well,
Yeah.
I'm I guess I'm not going to take much here, just
I'm
I need a little bit.
I have this
Um,
business opportunity.
yeah.
But
So
what can you adjust in the brain to help people figure out what it would take to make them happy? And you brought up spiritual. I think people who are spiritual are better off than the ones like atheists. I don't know. I'm picking on everybody today, Jay, but do you think spiritual people are better off than atheists?
not necessarily. I know some atheists that are probably more morally upright than some of the people that I know that purport to be of a particular religion. I know somebody who is a Zoroastrianism. I mean, that's not a very common one, but he's one of the nicest guys you'd ever want to know.
Yeah,
I mean, the religion is a group thing. Some of them are philosophical and less group like. Taoism, there's philosophical Taoism that doesn't necessarily meet on Sundays,
the
but
scientists.
yeah, you can end up having the Christian Scientist thing and uh, uh, have issues with health treatment,
Yeah,
um, but none of those group things necessarily end up working for everybody, and you can be in that and on Monday be an absolute jerk.
yeah,
So, and you know, so getting your head right is important. If
Yeah.
there's been history of trauma and you're carrying around the marks of trauma in your brain, and there are marks for it, we can end up seeing that. And if we see it, there's ways to train your brain to not react as reactively, and to start to perceive emotion clearly instead of
Yeah.
misappropriately, and to get the frontal lobe affect regulation working properly so that you're not excessively sad or excessively agitated or amotivational anhedonia. I mean, I saw something where some scientists find 6 types of depression. Okay, since depression is just an imaginary category, I'm sure you can
Yeah.
find at least six
Yeah.
of them,
Right.
you know. So, the DSM isn't exactly real. But what we can do is see what the function of your frontal lobe, which is affect regulation. It's also attentional regulation, and if your affect's not right, your attention is going to be goofy, and vice versa. So there are comorbidities associated with that.
Yeah. This is a Seaburn Fisher type question, Jay, but you can be more subjective than Seaburn. What percentage of the population that are anxious or having a rough go of it mentally had a rough ACEs score 5 years and below, 8 years and whatever it is? If you could throw out a number.
Well, ACE's score of 4 and above start to predict late life. Well, not even that late. I'm 75, so it starts happening at much earlier than my age. Uh,
74.
yeah, yeah. Well, 75 this year, so I can't have pre-senile dementia. I'm already 75, so there's nothing pre about it, you know. Um, uh, no, if you've had trauma and you don't even consider it severe. They gave an ACEs test to a group of psychologists and sociologists and social workers in a large meeting, and they all could respond, and the responses were all tallied, and they reported back, and that 40% of the people in that audience had scores above 4 and would be predicted as having late life. And they're professionals already, so they're starting to get into that later life category. Hypertension, cardiac problems,
Hmm.
the stress related agitation, anxiety, depression, the mental faculty failures. So, chronic stress. Well, it wasn't that bad. I had a little trauma when I was young. Well, but yeah, but I've been a little nervous for a long
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Okay, well, a little nervous. Well, what's that doing? You got a HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal. So your brain, a little anxious, is having your pituitary release ACTH, and your adrenals are pumping out cortisol. Cortisol is stress hormone. Well, first of all, it's good that you got it because it suppresses inflammatory responses. So if your immune system kicks up, you've got to have cortisol. But if you have chronic stress, your cortisol is going to start to collapse eventually, and the cortisol start to erode your hippocampus and your amygdala. So your brain literally is being negatively impacted by
Yeah.
the level of stress, and the structures in the brain that operate for emotion and memory and all of that are being degraded. So you're you're setting yourself up for mental difficulties because of
Hmm.
the it's not so bad. I my family wasn't awful. I didn't suffer. Well, yeah, you didn't, but you know
It's all relative.
your score of 4 is enough.
Yeah. Right. 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 Right.
Yeah, there were shootings in the neighborhood every night, but it wasn't in the house,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, the stressors are stressors, and the if somebody hasn't ever taken the ACEs 10-question simple quick 10-question form, look it up online and take a look at it. Uh, it's eye-opening. When the scientist who found it had thousands of patients, hundreds and then thousands. He took it to a friend who was another doctor, and they looked at the data and they said, wow, in order to make this proof, we're going to have hundreds of thousands. And they set it up with a gigantic study and they got their hundreds of thousands. It's a very strong, well substantiated prediction for later life outcomes. And it's how much more personalized medicine, individualized, evidence-based medicine do you need to know that you need to have an intervention, even though you think it wasn't so bad? You know, I, I had a happy enough childhood. Oh yeah, there was a divorce, and oh yeah, there was there was some of this and some of that, and
right.
you know, but there's enough people that have had enough trauma to consider themselves having PTSD, and uh, the higher your level of arousal, the more likely you are to end up having over arousal related trauma. Think of a simple model. PTSD is very, very, very complex, and but a simple model. You have a phobia. A phobia is very, very simple. There's a freaking spider, and Pete, you were a little excited and a little over aroused, and then you saw this spider and it moved your arousal even higher. You had a panic attack, and now you have a fear of these little fuzzy spiders. These
Mhm.
little fuzzy spiders aren't anything, but they triggered you.
Yep.
So, to get rid of your phobia, step one is not to show you a little fuzzy thing that's like a spider, because that's going to freak you out. Step one is to teach you to drop your arousal level. Now you've dropped your arousal level. Now we can create a hierarchy of things that are spider-ish, spideroid, and then eventually the spider. And we show you the fuzzy dice hanging on the rear view mirror of the car. Oh, that's not spider-like, and this you chill out about that. And eventually, we can pull out the tarantula, and you go, ha ha ha! You're trying to freak with me. There's a spider. It's nothing to me anymore. You've been desensitized. Well, PTSD, you have to drop the arousal level to start to do any kind of exposure therapy, because before you drop the arousal level, it's just re-exposure. It's not
Right,
exposure
right.
therapy. So
So
anyway, the arousal level can be measured in the brain. Uh, you can objectively tell somebody's arousal level with a simple flashing light. If you have a little rheostat that can speed up and slow down the flashing of the light, and you just observe the frequency at which the person thinks the light is on constantly. Well, if you have a higher arousal level and you've got a faster alpha, the flicker fusion frequency is at a higher frequency. If your alpha slows down, the flicker fusion adds a lower frequency. And that's a classic 1950s technique to judge your arousal level. And you don't have to have a little thing to make things flicker. You can actually look at the alpha frequency, and
right.
predict the arousal level based on that. And between the alpha frequency and the amount of beta, there's two kinds of central nervous system over arousal: fast alpha and beta spindles. So if you look for those two, you can see over arousal.
So everybody that's listening and watching, we every Wednesday, 6 p.m. Central Time, the last month or so, we've been doing a live chat Q&A, kind of user generated, user guided. Whoever shows up asks the questions and generates, the content. And We have panelists, of course, Jay Gunkelman, Dr. Marie Swingle when she's in town, Santiago Bron, John Meckrut, Anthony Ramos, Joy Lunt, and somebody asks a
Joshua
question, and
Moore.
Joshua Moore, of course, can't
Yep.
forget Joshua. And anybody else, any providers that are out there that Jay approves of, please, join, join, join us. But it really helps when we have more people. It's early in the process, and it's getting better each time. The things we're running into is, what are we going to talk about? Well, we're going to talk about whatever the people talk about. And Vegas nerve came up again. It's 2 weeks in a row. And
Yeah.
if that's what people want to talk about, that's great. So I'm just letting everybody know that Wednesday, 6 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, Singapore, I think it's 7 in the morning, 8 in the morning, out there when Santiago can make it. And when we do the live chat, Jay, I think anything that comes up from that chat, that it may pour over into this show. If any of the panelists want to come on and join us on the next day if they, because we're doing it 60 minutes and it's a hard cut. And if somebody didn't get their say, we're welcome on a Thursday, to come on to be a guest and talk about it. And even some of the guests that are on, if they want to email or something didn't happen, we can address it here. We're basically just trying to do anything to make it easier for people to anonymously ask questions that we can answer, knowing that, look, I got an MBA. I don't got no I don't got nothing inside D. Okay, nothing. All right. Jay, you call yourself an over glorified tech. I'm over glorified video editor. So check with your primary care physician
Yep.
first. But I think we got something going. If we can organize things where we're not stepping over each other, we're getting better. Looking for ideas on feedback. So Jay, that's a long way of asking of how do you think yesterday went compared to the other shows?
I I I think first of all, the audience. Uh, it takes time for people to recognize
Yeah.
that there's actually something happening.
Right.
And it's just last time the audience started to ramp up. It's entirely possible that the format's going to work out really well for generating audience-based questions that aren't just a commercial feed or a bot. But
Yeah.
the questions are filtered through the panel,
Yep.
and we've got some very very interesting questions, and obviously the vagal nerve issue, vasovagal syncope,
Yep.
and the brain circuits that are involved in the vagal nerve, and the vagal nerve isn't just peripheral; it's also in the brain, and it's how the brain and body communicate back and forth, and the insula is ground zero for the vagal nerve and the sympathetic parasympathetic balance, which ends up having vagal uh, control. All of that is neuroanatomy, neurophysiology stuff that I can comment. Now you have really good clinical people too to talk about the clinical end of it, and
Right.
that it
Listen to them
and
before us.
yeah, and they're all big grown ups, and they're quite capable of telling me to shut up and
Right.
listen to
Right.
them for a moment. So
That's right.
yeah, I try
Well,
not to dominate totally, but me, press start.
whatever. What? And if somebody can't make it at that time, they can always email Pete at PETE@neuronoodle.com, send a question in, and then I'll read it off in there. And we'll keep it going because I might do something, Jay. I know it's tough because later in the day for me, you got a certain time window that you can work with. I get it. I might try something where we'll do one with you and we'll do one a little bit later to see if
Yeah,
more people can show up and
yeah.
you
I,
can
I
comment.
I'm not a
The,
magical person that has to be online in your deal for it to
oh,
work.
first
I mean,
first of all, you are magical. But what I think is if we do something a little bit later, that gives the next day we can talk about that and comment with you on it or whatever. I don't
yep.
know. We're spitballing here. We're figuring it out and open to There are no bad ideas.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I do, because I start my day about 6.
Yeah. Right.
The ending at after 6 ends up being a little late for me.
We're gonna figure something out, Jay. We're gonna figure something out. So,
Got to give me time
greetings.
to play with the dog,
Thanks. Where's
So,
Sky at? I heard him whining in there.
Renita's home today. I think they may have actually gone out on a walk.
Okay. Okay.
So,
Okay. Well, greetings from Lake of the Ozarks. I'm sure I make half the people happy. The other half are like, "You stink, Pete." But everybody
Lake of
have
the
a great.
Ozarks is a gorgeous area. My sister and brother-in-law go down there for their wintering when Fargo is minus 40, minus 50.
Oh wow. Okay.
They're down south. So and they've got some camp thing down
Right.
there
Right.
that
Right. Right.
they
Yeah.
pull a big trailer down, and a bunch of
Oh, I
friends
love
all
it. I
circle them
love
up
that.
and hang out.
Well,
So
don't worry. L.A., San Francisco. I'll come out there and I'll let you. You know, we can talk about the woes of the Republicans, the woes of the Democrats, and the woes of the libertarians who can't make a call.
my brother-in-law's a very conservative individual, and he
Yeah.
knows me. So
Yeah.
he had a gunkel bobble with him,
Yeah.
and they were down there, and he was going crab fishing. And they sent me a picture of him putting the little gunkel bobble in the crab trap. And think, we haven't had very good luck. We'll try this as bait, you know. So
Well,
uh,
Jay, say hi to Renita and Sky. Give them a noogie. Have a great weekend and appreciate the last 24 hours of the time that you've put in to help us get this mental health word out.
well, best of luck with the with your mission here of getting the
Our
word out.
mission.
So,
Our mission. Jay, have a
well,
great weekend.
I just planned. Bye bye.
Bye.
The NeuroNoodle Podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.